Hey guys, welcome back. So today, working on this Champion dual fuel generator. And I think most of you might recognize this machine. I have made a couple videos on it. If you missed those videos, I'll leave links to them down below. But to catch you up real quick, this machine at 1 year old dropped a valve and it caused quite a bit of engine damage. Ultimately, I got the engine rebuilt. It was running well, and I thought we were out of the woods. But then I did the load test, and what I discovered was that the governor, although it is controlling the engine speed, it has excessive droop. Now, mechanical governors like this, they do have droop by design. Usually 4 to 5 hertz droop is what I see from no load to full load. But in this case, this droops by about 10 hertz or double what it should. So under full load, this actually runs closer to 50 hertz instead of 60 hertz. Now, the total droop in RPM is only 600 RPM. So if this engine was on anything else but a generator, you probably wouldn't notice. But on a generator, you want to try to maintain the 60 hertz as best you can. And the way that this is, it's really not cutting it. I would not use this on my house with electronics that are sensitive or are expensive. So, although I'd say most electronics would probably be okay, not everything would. So my hope today is to dig into this governor system and find out where I went wrong. Is there something actually wrong with it, or is this how it is on this machine? So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So I'm actually going to start by getting the tank out of the way. It's just blocking the view to the external components to the governor system. So the fuel line's already been disconnected. We also have to disconnect the vent. And then we just have a bolt in each corner, and this should lift right out of the way. So now with the tank out of the way, we can see all the external components of the governor. And one thing to look for is just inspect all the components. Make sure they're connected, make sure it moves freely without issue, and make sure nothing is making contact. This line right here is really close to the governor rod, but it is a 1/4 inch away. There is no contact. Sometimes though, if you have something dragging on something like the governor rod, what can happen is that you'll see speed deviations like we're seeing now. But in this case, nothing is contacting it and nothing's binding. So I don't think that is the issue. We have the governor spring here, which looks to be in good shape. This is the adjustment, which applies more or less tension based on the setting of that screw. And the one adjustment I made in the last video was to move this governor spring from the outer hole, which pretty much every Honda clone has it in the outer hole, to the inner one. So the further in or closer to the shaft, the more sensitive the governor is. So instead of having 4 or 5 hertz droop, you might reduce it to 3 hertz droop. And if you move it in even more, maybe 1 hertz droop. The issue is at some point, it'll start to oscillate, meaning it'll overcompensate. The engine will over slow down, then over speed up, and it's going to sound like surging. So a lot of times, about 4 hertz is what you want to see to avoid that situation. So moving it to the inner position should have improved things, but it actually didn't. So I'm thinking I'm going to set this back to where it normally is. This was just trying to compensate for a problem. The other issue I suspected is actually over here, the idle set screw. I thought maybe that was out too far and the spring tension wasn't enough. So it was actually the set screw that was setting the engine idle speed. But as it turns out, that was not the case either. But I am noticing something now, which potentially could be it. Let me get you in here real close and show you what I just saw. So I've got you zoomed in pretty much as close as I can. And what I want you to pay attention to is the anti-surge spring. This does exactly what it sounds like. It takes the slop out of the governor rod, both where it connects to the carb, as well as the governor arm on the other side. So with that spring in place, there's no slop, and it should not cause a surge. But what I want you to pay careful attention to, which I didn't see before, is where the spring connects to the carb body. You know, it comes in here, there is a kind of half loop, and then it ends. Now, right now, the throttle is open, but if I close it, watch what happens down underneath to that loop that comes through. It's actually catching part of the carb body, and it's bending that spring. So like that, it is applying a spring force, and potentially that's enough to be throwing the governor off. So this could be good news, could be a really quick video. I did buy actually a new governor weight for inside the engine. I was really hoping to not have to install that. So what I'm thinking is, let's not touch anything yet. You know, let's fire the generator up like it is, and we'll put a load on it. I'll just demonstrate what we were seeing in the last video, make sure it's still doing it. And then I'm going to correct this problem, and we'll try it again. I think I'm pretty much ready to go. I do have a light plugged in and turned on just so we can see visually when the engine starts that we are making power. We also have a display here which will show the volts as well as the hertz. Now the fuel I'm going to run this on is propane. You know, propane usually runs an engine very clean and the exhaust is very clean, but not always. You know, if the mix is incomplete and it's not burning properly, this can produce carbon monoxide the same as gasoline. So, you know, in my case, I do have ventilation going. I have several carbon monoxide detectors that have displays on them that show me the parts per million. So if I see anything concerning, you know, I will shut things down right away. But the plan is to get the engine started. Of course, we'll let things warm up, but not too long, given that we're running inside. And we do have the load bank right here. So, you know, I'm not going to bring it all the way up to 8,000 watts. It is usually pretty apparent at about 4,000 or 5,000 watts. You know, some symptoms I noticed last time testing was that when you put a load on, even a fairly small one like 2,000 watts, the hertz drop rather abruptly before recovering. So, you know, without a load, we should be around 61.5, maybe 62 hertz. And when you flip the load on, the hertz were diving to about 57 before recovering to about 60. And that is also unusual. The other thing I saw with this machine is that although the no-load speed is 61.5 hertz, when you first start the engine speed is slower than that. You know, it governs it to about 57 hertz and then quickly does come up to 61.5 hertz, but not like it should. You know, the only time I've seen kind of behaviors like that is when something is interfering with the movement of the external governor system. So that little spring could definitely be it. So let's get the engine started. Let's validate that things are still broken, and then we'll make a small change and we'll try this again. And yeah, the problem, it still exists. So like before, the engine starts easily, but the speed was a little slow. It started at around 57 hertz, and it took about half a minute before we got up to about 61.5 hertz. I applied a fairly light load. We did see that engine speed come down to about 57 hertz from 61.5. And 57 hertz, I mean, it should not be running at that speed unless we're at full load. And we weren't even halfway there. So let's make a small modification to that anti-surge spring, and we'll try this again. I'm just going to try to squeeze it tight. And that did it. We are now clearing. Let's try it again. Unfortunately, it can't be that simple. Same result, this time I did bring it quickly up to 6,000 watts, and you saw that engine speed. It dropped, I think, below 55 hertz. So yeah, definitely no improvement whatsoever. So the next thing I'm going to do, just because it's probably one of the easier things to try, is to swap out that spring. I did get a new spring from Champion, so I am going to remove the old and install the new one in the outer position. That is where it's supposed to be. We get the engine restarted, set the engine speed back to about 61.5 hertz, and we'll do another quick test. And in case you're wondering, this propane generator, it does produce carbon monoxide. Right now we're at 68, now 63 parts per million. So that should clear in a minute. So I'm going to vacate the area, and then I'll resume by getting the spring installed. So we'll just take off as much tension as we can. Old springs on the left, new ones on the right. So we'll get it installed. Actually, before I connect it, just moving the linkage just to make sure there's no binding, and it feels good. Okay, let's get the engine started. We'll reset the speed and try the load test again. Well, unfortunately, changing out that spring made no difference. We still have the issue, and to be honest, I didn't expect that it would, because the original spring looks absolutely perfect. There is no sign of a problem, but it is a quick and easy thing to try, and really one of the last things we can try external to the engine. This time around too, under a 5,000 watt load, I did manually open that throttle plate. I wanted to make sure that the engine was not out of horsepower, and it had no issues getting right back to 61.5 hertz. The only thing holding the engine back is the governor. So there is one more check we can do, and for that I actually need to disconnect the governor rod from the carburetor. So let me get you set up over here. We'll get the airbox off, get that rod disconnected, and we'll double check if the governor is calibrated correctly. So I've got the governor rod detached. I've pushed the carb back in all the way. And what we need to do is double check the alignment of where the bend is on the governor rod versus where it goes in on the carburetor, which is right there. So I'm going to leave the punch there just so you can see that a little bit better. Right now the throttle is in the idle position, but the governor rod, that is actually being held by the spring right now in wide open throttle. So to the left is idle, to the right is wide open throttle. So we want to rotate this in the same direction. And where this goes down should align with the carburetor, within 1/8 of an inch. If it's off more than that, then the governor calibration is not correct. In this case, we are pretty much dead on, which I kind of already knew, because if this was off, the engine would be racing out of control. And that's not the symptom we have here. Not to mention, in the last video, I did double check this off camera just to make sure. And things are dead on. And that's pretty much all we can check external to the governor system. So either I missed something and the governor inside the engine was actually damaged when the valve got dropped, because when the valve dropped, it shattered the piston. It did send pieces flying. I did double check the footage of the governor gear and the weights, and they look perfect. But there is a chance that they're not working right, or potentially when this spun up for the first time, maybe one of the weights was damaged and it flew off. And if that was the case, the internal governor wouldn't be exerting the expected force at 61.5 hertz. And because of that, we're undersetting the spring tension. And in that case, the spring isn't sized properly for the force the governor is applying. So there's two options, or maybe three. We could try a smaller spring and just ignore any damage that's in there, or we should do the right thing and take a look at the governor inside the engine and just make sure it's fully intact. And if it is, then we have no choice but to put it back together and either leave it where it is, assuming that that's how it was designed, or we could try some different springs. But that's kind of the last ditch effort. So I'm thinking for now, let's get the oil out of the engine. I might try sticking the borescope in there to see if we can get a glimpse of the governor to see if the weights are still intact. And someone also suggested that potentially when the piston flew apart, it may have actually bent the governor shaft so that the shaft is not contacting the governor properly. So yeah, I guess we're going to find out. So let's get the oil out and take a look with the borescope and see what we can see. I can pretty much tell you already, I don't think we're going to be able to see the governor gear. It's directly above the oil fill, right when you enter the block. A lot of engines have an oil fill on each side, so if I had that option here, I could come in from the other side and likely get a glimpse of it, but coming in from here, I don't think we're going to be able to see anything. And no, we can't see it. It's on top of these gears, and we just don't have the angle we need. So the oil's out. Let's get the generator off. We'll get the engine opened up. Well, the governor gear, it is on the back side of the engine cover. So ultimately, that is what we're after. In order to get that off, we need to first start by removing the exhaust. Then we can disconnect the wiring, get the stator and the rotor off. And then finally, we can likely leave the engine in the frame, just remove the bolts and pull the cover off. Unfortunately, the governor seems to work just fine. There's no missing teeth. It spins without issue. All the weights are intact. Nothing is broken or out of place. And the little plunger, or the top hat in the middle, is where it's supposed to be. So, yeah, no smoking gun here. And on the engine side, everything looks normal as well. Let me show you that. So this is the governor shaft that comes down in through right to here. And you can see there is a mark. It can be felt, and that is typical. I don't see any evidence of damage, and I don't see any other marks like it was riding out of place. Everything moves like it should. So yeah, this one, it's a bit of head scratcher, I'd say. So yeah, unfortunately, there is no smoking gun as far as what's going on with this governor system. It looks perfect, both on the outside as well as the inside. I don't see any flaws. I don't see any damage. That said, though, I did buy another one, and since we're here, I think we should swap the part. But I think this would be called firing the parts cannon because there is no evidence that there is a problem here. But we've gone to the effort to get here, so let's just put the new part on. We'll put it back together, and we'll try it again. But to be honest, I'm not expecting a different result here. There's a few ways we can go about removing the governor. There are destructive ways, and then there's trying to save it ways. And in this case, the governor, I'm still not sure it's bad, so I'm not going to destroy it if I can avoid it. The easiest way, assuming it's not hopelessly stuck, is to just tap that pin out right there. That's what holds this entire governor in place. And I think it is just a press fit. So I'm going to flip this upside down. We'll block it with some wood, and we'll try tapping it without heat, see if it comes out. Otherwise, we'll apply some heat and try it again. It's kind of scary, actually, how easy that does come out. So let's get the new one installed. I'm just noticing something here. I'm looking at the parts of the new kit, and there is a washer. That washer, I believe, goes between the case and the governor gear. But this one didn't have it. I've been looking around, hoping maybe it just fell out and rolled away, but I don't think it did. So yeah, that is interesting. I'm not sure that would cause a performance problem in the governor, but it would potentially cause wear on the bottom side. I'm not sure. But that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we're onto something. There is no stop on this, so you just have to drive it in until it's just about to surface here. So we got a ways to go yet. Yeah, I think that's where the old one was. So we'll call that good. So we get the washer on. It's already been oiled up. And the next part's a little bit tricky. There is a groove right there that retains the governor gear. So technically you could drop this in, put this little hog ring on the post, slide it down and lock it in. The problem is the little top hat can't install after the fact. You have to do everything at the same time. So the way to kind of get around that is to put the ring right on the top of the posts where it's tapered, and that kind of retains it right there. Slide this up almost to the top, open the weights, and you should be able to get this in now before you slide this down. So I'm going to add a bit of oil. We'll add some more later. And then you just push down and hopefully the hog ring goes into place here. Yep. Oop, it was going. And there, it's clicked in place. Governor's installed. The gasket came off nice and clean, so it's usually not my style to reuse gaskets, but this engine has not been assembled that long, and this gasket, it's in good shape, so I'm going to reuse it. So now that the generator is reinstalled and the bolts are torqued down, we do need to check the alignment. So I pulled the spark plug, that way compression's not fighting us, and I'm going to pull the engine over. I want to make sure it rotates without issue, that there's no binding or scraping sounds coming from the generator. Okay, good. No issues at all. The engine rotates freely. So let's finish this up. We need to do the wiring, get the exhaust back on, put this plate back where it belongs, and we should also double check the calibration of the governor now that we have a new one installed. So same test as before. This is already in the wide open throttle position. We're going to rotate the throttle plate into the same. And you can see we are now significantly off, which is kind of surprising because, we do have a washer in there now. So I expected it to move out the width of the washer, but that's quite a bit more. Interesting. So we absolutely need to reset the governor calibration because like this, chances are the engine will race out of control. And actually, it's so off, I can't even get the linkage where it belongs. So let's loosen up the bolt on the governor arm. We will get this installed like it should, and then we will calibrate things and lock it down. So now we're loose. This arm should move independently of the shaft, although it's still tight, so we might have to pry this a bit with a screwdriver to open up that gap. Okay, yeah, I think it's loose on there, so we can slide the carb back a bit. Get this installed. And we'll do the anti-surge spring as well. Okay, and with the carb in position, we need to hold the arm to the right. I guess that's your right, which is wide open throttle. And we need to hold the throttle as well, and then use our third arm to set that. So the way it works is you hold each of these in wide open throttle, and then you need to also rotate this in the wide open throttle direction. So in this case, if I move the arm to the left, that's idle. And if I move the arm to the right, that's wide open throttle. And the shaft rotates counterclockwise. So we need to rotate the shaft until it stops moving, which it feels like we're there. Although this arm is still pretty tight. So let's loosen this up. I want to make sure we're up against the governor weights before we lock everything down. You can see the shaft, it now moves independently of the arm. So again, holding everything in wide open throttle. So that's idle, wide open throttle. Rotate the shaft counterclockwise until it stops, which is right there, and then lock down. Okay, that should do it. Let's just double check. Yeah, we are right there. About 1/8 of an inch off. It's about the max that we can be off, but I think the governor should have control of the speed. So I'm going to finish this up. I'm just going to get the airbox back on, and then we'll try it out. So what do you think? Will adding a washer make any kind of a difference? I have my doubts. But then again, too, I wasn't expecting the calibration to be so far off just adding the washer into the mix. So potentially this might resolve the issue. So let's get the engine started. I do need to dial the speed back in to 61.5 hertz. Once I do that, I will put a load on and see if the governor response is any different. I've got to admit, I did not think this one was going to have a happy ending. After getting the engine open and inspecting the gear and not seeing a problem, I kind of thought we were at the end of the road. I swapped the part anyway, and I'm glad I did because the issue is no more. We just pulled 6,000 watts and the engine speed held fine at 59 hertz. The last time we did that with the old governor, the engine speed was 55 hertz. So yeah, that is a dramatic improvement. And this one, I think we can call it fixed. So I guess the question in my mind is, what was wrong with the old governor? Was it the missing washer? Is there something wrong with the gear that I'm missing? Or potentially the governor reset? I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.